Hello, everybody. This is Old Buck Dave back again with episode, oh boy, I forget.
168.
It's 160 something. That's just what happens when you get old. Anyway, so that other voice you heard was none other than you know who, Mr. Dale.
Old Buck, Old Buck Dale.
Welcome, Dale. And hey, before we talk about our special guest, let me just ask you, what's new and different in your world? What's happened to you lately?
The old bucks reach a certain certain age, and there are things happen to you when you get older that I look back on and find kind of amusing. And today we both ride bicycles, only I ride mine to the supermarket. You ride yours 30 miles, and two different styles of riding. But I was just going to say today was an interesting day because I managed to get through a standard supermarket parking lot and almost got hit 3 times.
Oh man, that's no good.
I'm thinking maybe it's me that my peripheral vision or something has gone bad, or there just is so much traffic that it was a real thrill to get home alive. And then another strange thing happened to me.
Well, we're going to be talking about strange things today. So yeah, bring it on.
Well, these are real life strange things. I can put my finger on these things. This is quite. There's a elderly gentleman that he calls me for just to help him out. He's by himself, and if he has an issue or something, he'll give me a call. So today he called me, said, "I don't know who to call." I said, "Okay, how can I help you?" He said, "I think I threw my car keys and my house keys and everything into a 3 cubic yard dumpster. That's pretty big." So I said, "Oh boy." So I said, "All right, I'll go look."
You did dumpster diving?
No, I wasn't climbing in that thing. It was,
okay.
But I walked him through it. If he puts it in the corner, sometimes it's within a few feet. If it does go in and it falls on there, it'll be something on top. I did a quick survey and I said, "Listen, it's not in here." I said, "I'm pretty sure it isn't in here." But the point of my story is, I walked back to his house and we sat down and I started talking to him for quite a while. I kept asking him questions. Is it likely you would do this? And when's the last time you had that? And finally we worked around to all the questions. And I said, "Do you have any other clothes that you wore today?" And then, oh, I did. Anyhow, long story short, he finds his keys in his shorts hanging behind the bathroom door.
See?
And he swore, I said, "I looked everywhere in this house. I've torn this house apart." I said, "Well, you couldn't have looked everywhere or you'd have found them." So
it had a happy ending. That's good.
It was a happy ending, but that's an old buck thing. That lost keys and who do you call? And you need help. So it was a good deed, and I felt good about it. Maybe my turn will come one day. So.
Maybe, yeah. Hey, speaking of that, we've got a couple letters from afar. I'm only going to read one here tonight, though, because we want to save some time for our special guest. So this was a letter we just got in from a listener, and the listener said, "So glad to hear I'm not the only one having senior moments and short-term memory loss." Okay, we're talking about last week. Okay, so that's perfect. This person says, "As for my own personal taste, I really hated the music you had at the end. I really hate anything country." So if you recall, it was kind of banjo music, country. It was more like, anyway. And this person said, "When the radio station is playing the crossover songs, which are really country, I have to change the station. They make me want to barf."
Oh my.
You need a faster, more upbeat song to end the podcast. Of course, this is my own opinion. This is your podcast, so you get to do whatever you want to do. Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? So thank you.
Thank that listener. Yeah.
Thank you, listener. Yeah. Okay. Hey, let's move on here to the main reason we're here today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our special guest, who is Mr. Stan Gordon. He was trained as an electronics technician who specialized in radio communications. He worked in the advanced consumer electronics sales field for over 40 years. Stan has been researching UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, and other mysterious events in Pennsylvania since 1959. Since then, he has been involved with the investigation of thousands of unusual incidents. For many years, Stan led teams of scientists, engineers, and research specialists to investigate mysterious occurrences across Pennsylvania, He is the primary investigator of the 1965 UFO crash incident that occurred near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. He's given illustrated lectures both locally and nationally on topics of UFO, Bigfoot, cryptids, and he's going to tell us what cryptids are, and strange encounters since the late 1960s. He was listed in the 2005 Fate magazine special, the 100 most influential people in ufology today. So he's there. He's the producer of the award-winning UFO video documentary Kecksburg, The Untold Story. Stan is the author of 4 books: Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Case Book, Really Mysterious Pennsylvania, Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures. Now, Stan's 4th book, Creepy Cryptids and the Strange UFO Encounters of Pennsylvania, was released on March 2nd, 2022. Stan appears frequently on the radio and television programs discussing his research on these topics. He's been interviewed for radio and TV programs nationally and internationally on just about any network or show that you can think of, the Sci-Fi Channel, Discovery Channel, Travel Channel. He's been everywhere. So with that, welcome Stan Gordon.
Yeah, welcome, Stan.
Good evening, Dave and Delman. Thanks for having me on your program.
Really glad you could spend some time with us, Stan. Hey, so let's start off with talking about the Kecksburg UFO incident. Now, we mentioned this on our podcast a couple months back, and one of the listeners wrote in and said, "Hey, you need to talk to Stan Gordon. He's the guy on all this stuff." So I tracked you down. I found your website, and so here we are. Now, you were around 15, 16 when the Kecksburg incident occurred. So tell us a little bit about the whole Kecksburg thing here.
We could talk for days and days about Kecksburg, and in fact, this Saturday is the 58th anniversary of that incident, December 9th. And yep, you're right. I was 16 years old when the incident happened, but I was already interested in UFO subjects since 1959 when I was a 10-year-old kid who was interested in science and electronics, and I had overheard a radio show talking about unusual happenings. And that's how I got involved. I started reading the books at the local library and started cutting out articles out of the newspapers. And I was 16 when that happened near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, about 12 miles from my home. I'm about 30-some miles east of Pittsburgh, and that's a little further, not too much further, where the little rural area of Kecksburg is in Westmoreland County in Mount Pleasant Township. And it's a long, evolved story. Just very briefly, I was tuned into one of the big radio stations in Pittsburgh that evening, KDKA, because they had a well-known talk show called Contact, and they were having a special guest on the show that night who was Frank Edwards, who was a journalist who has written some books on unusual happenings, and I went to hear what Frank Edwards had to say, and coincidentally, almost the entire show was focusing on this breaking news story that was coming across the news wires, and the reports were coming into the station all around Pittsburgh prior to the showing at 8 o'clock that night. It was earlier, around 4:47 in the afternoon when the calls started coming in, about this brilliant fiery object was seen from the tip of Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And it was a really intriguing night. They were interviewing witnesses. They were reading the wire stories. They were interviewing a reporter. It was an amazing night. And then later that evening, KDK TV was breaking in with live reports that the object that was seen over Pittsburgh had reportedly landed outside of the little village of Kecksburg, and that the military was now arriving to investigate and search for an unidentified flying object. It was a very fascinating night that I'll never forget. And I began to document, write all the information. I stayed up till very late running back and forth between, I'm sure you remember, the old black and white console TV and the radio in the other room of the house. And I'm running back and forth trying to get all the latest information. And the next day I was thinking, boy, I sure hope this makes the news. So the first thing I did, I ran up to the newsstand in downtown Greensburg and picked up all the local newspapers. And there was in front page in all the papers. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the Pittsburgh Press, the Greensburg Tribune Review had 2 editions. It was a big story that made local and national news. And there was a lot we did not know at the time. All I can tell you is that very briefly, the people saw this object. Something fell into the woods, apparently. And as the military came in, and there were other law enforcement, the state police were there, fire departments were there, blocking off the roads because multitudes, hundreds of people began to come into this small community after hearing these radio broadcasts and TV broadcasts that a UFO had fallen, and people wanted to see what it was down the woods. Anyhow, there's a lot we did not know at the time. And officially the next day, it was out in the news that there was a thorough search of the woods during the late evening, during the night. They found absolutely nothing. There was likely a meteor in the sky, which is officially what the explanation was. End of story officially. Well, over weeks.
I was going to say, but there's more to the story. Tell us some more.
Oh, a lot more to the story. Yeah. So over many weeks and years and months, I tracked down hundreds of people who were involved. So I tracked down a lot of the volunteer firemen from different departments. I tracked down state troopers who were there. I talked to family members, but I also talked to many reporters. And this is what's so intriguing. So as the story's breaking that Thursday night, you had reporters from all the major Pittsburgh newspapers, radio, and TV who were covering the story, and they came out to Kecksburg that night. And many of them saw military vehicles or saw military personnel, in some cases interacted with them. So I was able to interview many of those reporters over the years. And what I later learned, again, there's so much to the story, that when this object came in from the greater Pittsburgh area, and it moved into Westmoreland County from the Pittsburgh area from Allegheny County, but that as it passed over Greensburg, where I live, and no, I did not see it. It made a turn to the south, which, again, a lot of this we didn't know at the time. It made a turn to the south. It was seen by many people sequentially in these small rural farming communities. It moved out to the mountains of Laurelville, about 3.5 miles away. And anyhow, according to a witness, it kind of hesitated over the mountain. Many, many people saw this along the path. It began to track back outside of Kecksburg. It made another turn, then dropped down into the woods. And there were witnesses in that area that saw this thing come in very low level as it was coming down to fall into the wooded area. And those witnesses said this thing was moving very slowly, almost like an aircraft on approach to an airport, like it was controlled. It went down, they said, almost like a controlled landing. And nobody reported any parachutes at the time or on the ground or in the vicinity. So here's what I found out. Within a very short time, after some of the locals saw the object coming down from the sky, they went down into the woods to see what had fallen, and they came across this large metallic acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. So this object is about 10 to 12 feet in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter. It's shaped like a big metallic object, like a big acorn, one solid piece of metal, kind of an off-gold bronze color that was big enough for a man to stand inside of. And there were witnesses, and one witness was a volunteer fireman who was not from Kecksburg at the time, but he and the search team, he stood within a few feet of it. And they're looking at this thing, and according to witnesses, there was no weld marks, no seams, no weld marks, nothing like that. The one witness said it looked like somebody took liquid metal and poured into an acorn-shaped mold. And on the raised up part of the object on the back were these raised up markings that looked more like symbols than any type of writing. And luckily, that one witness, because of his family background, he was somewhat familiar with Cyrillic. So he said he was truly convinced it was not of Soviet origin what he saw. But it's a very fascinating story. And of course, what's most intriguing about it is that you have multiple witnesses, including national and local newspaper stories confirming the military presence at the scene. Many, many people saw or interacted with armed military personnel. People saw Army and Air Force. And some people also said they saw NASA personnel there as well. And whatever it was that came down was apparently as a great interest to the government for them to respond as fast as they did. And I later learned from independent sources, and many, many witnesses observed this. They saw late that evening, actually early next morning, a large military flatbed tractor trailer carrying a large object shaped like a big acorn covered with a tarp out of that area. Was told, again, by independent sources, it went to Lockbourne Air Force Base near Columbus, Ohio. It was backed into a hangar. There was a armed security team that surrounded the hangar to protect it. It stayed at the base for a short time, then continued on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And where it's at today, we don't know.
Don't know.
And there have been, it's a very intriguing story. There's a lot more of this. We could talk for literally hours and hours and hours about this case. And there have been multitudes of theories on this since the day it happened. Every time you turn around, somebody has another theory. But whatever it was, we don't have the answer. And after 58 years, there's still a lot of people left. Many are deceased now who are involved, but there are many others who were kids or teenagers at the time who were there, and they still want answers to find out what really happened or what was the object that fell.
Yeah, I think that's the difference in the Kecksburg thing is it was a ton of witnesses, and there are so many facts that you can't say that they're real. That really happened. Something really happened here. Now you said on your website, or maybe it was an article or somebody interviewed. You said it's one of two things. It's either a top secret man-made object with re-entry control or an extraterrestrial craft.
Yeah, and those are two possibilities. Over the years, as I learned more about this case, and that's been many, many years since I've been doing this now, certain things turn up, and you change your ideas and theories a little bit. But was that something man-made? Was very sophisticated for that time period? Yet over the years, I talked to various NASA scientists and engineers, people who worked in the space program. I discussed with them what we knew and what we had, and they shake their heads and said, we didn't have that capability back in 1965. For something like that to stay, it's pretty large. There's no weld marks, no seams on it. It's one solid piece of metal. There was no markings on it. For example, it said USA, and there were those strange symbols on it. We don't know for sure what that was. But the whole point is this thing made definite turns along its trajectory. It made a slow descent with no parachutes, and you can still look at what we're launching today, and some of these devices still come back with parachutes. And, there's a lot of questions. Like I said, there's a lot more of this story, a lot more we have time to impossible to get into. But, if this was something so secretive, the advancements and changes since 58 years later, by now we should probably have known. So many of our secret developments and programs, and even the Soviet developments, have all been declassified under public knowledge. And again, we just don't know. And there's witnesses who swear that there were some other unusual elements to this story, but we just don't know for sure. Well, we do know for a fact something fell. The question is, what was it?
What is it? Yeah. Well, let me read. This is one theory that's been proposed. As you indicated, there's probably been a lot of theories. And this theory said that the object came down. It was a General Electric Mark II re-entry vehicle that had been launched by the Air Force as a spy satellite, but fell out of orbit. The size and shape appears similar to the Kecksburg UFO. The GE vehicle has 4 control jets, which would explain the controlled turning descent the witnesses described. One of the metals in its construction was copper, which would explain the green flames people saw. But it does say these photos show markings that might be foreign or something else. So anyway, that's one theory. And they stressed that it's a theory. They did not have 100% proof. They had some evidence, but so what's your comment on that?
And there's many theories out there, and nobody has been able to provide any definitive proof to any of these cases. That's the whole thing.
That's right.
And that's interesting. And the theories go back. I can tell you one of the first theories we heard that I heard many years ago was a family who had been interviewed by an Air Force officer at that time who told them there was a Gemini capsule that had been expelled in the area, which of course we know was not true. And then later, many other ones came. One person told us it was a projectile fired from a giant gun from a railroad car in Canada. Well, we were able to figure that one out pretty quick because the projectile wasn't even close to the size of this thing. And you've got to look, you know, you can have something that looks similar. That doesn't mean that's what it is. People don't seem to understand the description of what this thing looked like. This thing was there was no rivets, no separations, no seams in it. It was one solid piece. Okay. And
Stan,
in itself is
hold-
very, if you ever go and look at what was created in the space program, go to any of the air museums and take a look, and you can see there's easily something that was man-made. And some witnesses, you know, people who were pretty close to this thing at the time, they were just baffled because they knew when something looked manufactured, and they said it was unlike anything they had ever seen before. And again, it's all these different reports. The point is this: we don't know what it was. I've never tried to prove it was extraterrestrial. We don't know what it was, but there's a lot of information out there, and there's other data out there that I've not been able to confirm yet. And over the years, there's a lot of details I didn't bring out publicly right away until I had enough independent sources who could confirm it. One of those details is the fact that there wasn't just one military flatbed tractor trailer on the scene that night. There were two of them. And numerous witnesses over the years were able to confirm that to me because they saw two of them in the same area at the same time. So why would they have two military flatbed tractor trailers out in somebody's farmland with all this other military vehicle activity?
Hey, Stan, I have a question for you. Clearly, I mean, I'm fascinated by this, and I could see we could talk probably for a long, long time just about this one subject, but we have many more subjects. But let me ask you this. When you did it as a young age, you were interested in doing this. As you began to talk to people about these things, and you know, face to face, I assume it was face to face when you talked to them.
In hundreds, probably thousands of cases over the years.
Okay, face to face. What kind of reaction, like when you mentioned this, or you set I have a question for you, and you know, you set the tone. How do they react? Do they react like enthusiastically? Do they poo-poo it? Do they say, oh, well, I don't know? Do they hesitate, or do they enthusiastically tell you what they saw?
Again, you're talking about witnesses or people just the general public, but I can tell you when I first started back in 1959 in the 60s, there was a lot more ridicule with the subjects than there is today. But it's still the same with witnesses, whether it was back then or even in recent weeks, people I've interviewed. People report these things from all walks of life, men, women, children. Many of these people were professionals, educators, scientists, engineers. I get a lot of calls from police and first responders who see these things. Pilots. I've interviewed commercial pilots, corporate pilots, private pilots who have seen these things. Many, many outdoorsmen and experienced hunters who have seen things. And I can tell you this, so many of these witnesses were people who never would believe that these things were real or could occur till they had their own personal experience. And for so many of them, even this year, it was life-changing events because they encountered something that wasn't supposed to exist, and now they know it's real. And that's what's going on, and that's something I deal with continuously.
So they tell you these things with conviction. They tell you with convictions. You know, when you're speaking to them, you can see that. And I mean, you can see that when someone's really honest about something, whether they're describing a baseball game or whatever, if they're excited about it. So I would think that would be, I mean, it's some compelling testimony. Do you know what I mean?
And this is something I deal with on a regular basis. I mean, I remember right before the pandemic, I was interviewing independently some very experienced hunters who had some very strange encounters with Bigfoot type thing. And I'm telling you, I remember at least one guy in particular, he sat there with tears coming out of his eyes. And he said, I love the woods. I live in the woods. I'll never go back in the woods again. I mean, these are the kind of things you see and hear. And I mean, when you talk to police officers, I had one just several months ago told me, he said, I was trained to never be afraid. And he said, I'm telling you, what I've been experiencing several months ago here in Southwest PA out in the woods, he said, they're scaring the heck out of me.
So do you think Bigfoot's an alien?
Well, when you say alien, a lot of people are connecting with extraterrestrial, and that's not exactly what's going on. And this is a very long story as well, because, you know, I was interested in Bigfoot as a kid, And I
Yeah.
always thought when I knew about Bigfoot, it was probably some type of unknown animal, some type of unknown primate.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to go back a little bit in time. So I set up my UFO hotline in 1969 for the public report UFO sightings. And as people found out about it, it was ringing off the hook day and night. But the public was calling about not just UFOs, but anything unusual from alleged haunted houses to strange creatures. And I knew I couldn't do this all on my own. So I decided I was going to try to organize a volunteer group of research people. So in 1970, I set up the first of three groups that for many, many years would investigate this phenomenon across the state of Pennsylvania. So in 1970, the first group was called the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group. I was amazed who I had involved. And these are all done. We all did this out of our own pockets. We did this around our full-time jobs. I had scientists, I had engineers, I had technicians, I had police officers, former military specialists. I mean, you would not believe the credentials of some of the people involved. In the Pittsburgh area, I had people who were working at the time for Life Golf, Alcoa, Westinghouse, and they did this anonymously because of their positions. By 1973, I had set up to investigate across the state of Pennsylvania, and we are just jammed with reports coming in all the time. But we were very lucky that we had our group set up, because in 1973, two things happened. One, first we had the biggest UFO wave ever documented. Hundreds and hundreds of UFO sightings across Pennsylvania all year long. Many of these were in the local, the statewide, even national news was picking a lot of these reports up. It was we were even surprised ourselves, because we were getting not just reports from the public, but we were beginning to get referrals from the news media, from law enforcement, and we were just jamming with reports coming in. So we had all these UFO sightings all year long, and these were not just lights in the sky. Many of these were large structured objects below the ground. On the highways, on the turnpike, we had landing reports, things hovering over vehicles. It was just incredible what was going on. But then in the summer of 73, we had the biggest outbreak of Bigfoot sightings ever documented. That went on for months into 1974. And we've had documented Bigfoot sightings every year since then, including many this year. And many of them, by the way, have been in daylight at close range, even in recent months. But anyhow, going back to 73, so as this was all occurring, I was still convinced that Bigfoot was some type of unknown animal. Well, you got to remember, it's 1973. There's no internet like we have. There was no cell phones. People had no idea what other people were reporting. So we're getting widespread reports from multitudes of areas. My teams are out there, sometimes within minutes and hours, on the scene, documenting what we're finding. And we were finding some very interesting physical evidence back in those days. But anyhow, some very strange things began to come to our attention. One of the first things was, and you got to remember, this is all year round, including winter in the snow. We have trails of large tracks with big strides between them that just abruptly stop when there should be more tracks. That was going on in multiple cases, and now this is going on, by the way, all over the country. The same kind of thing is being reported. And then a lot of other weird things showed up. But one was a pattern where we would have a UFO sighting in a particular area. Within minutes to hours or days later, we have a Bigfoot sighting, or vice versa.
So my theory might be real. Bigfoot might be an alien.
Well, not necessarily alien. What I'm going to tell you now is the evidence we're finding now is that there's a physical and a non-physical component to whatever we're dealing with, and that's even going on in recent weeks and months with some reports coming in, which I'll explain to you later. But for a lack of a better term, we'll call it interdimensional. May not be from another planet. But I can tell you the one case, I'll just tell you the really brief part of the story. This was the one case, among others, in 73 that was so well documented, and it's one of the strangest cases in the world. It was October 25th, 1973 in Fayette County, PA, which is an active hotbed for sightings, especially along the Chestnut Ridge area. I got a call about 10:30 at night from a state trooper from Uniontown State Police Barracks. He just came back investigating this incident. He asked me to get my team up there as soon as possible. He thought there may be something still up on the farm. But the short part of the story is this. You had 15 witnesses that observed this huge barn-sized object low in the sky, slowly coming downward, that lands on the pasture of the farm. The one adult and two neighbor boys decided to go up to investigate what this thing was. When they get up to the field, this thing is about 250 feet away on the ground or right above it. But now it's not a complete sphere. It's a big white luminous dome making this loud, high-pitched whining noise. And at the same time, there's two huge Bigfoot creatures standing in the field at the same time. That's the short part of the story.
Oh my!
I don't know what to say about that one. I mean, so that's amazing. That's amazing. Hey, but I'm going to be a skeptic here, and I understand. I mean, Bigfoot, it could be in like a near extinct species. I understand that. But I'm just puzzled by where we never found any. We never found a Bigfoot skeleton. With all the people that have been out in the woods all the time, we just nobody brings back a Bigfoot that
Anybody try to shoot him? Anybody
unless
try to
you know
shoot him?
something we don't. Maybe you know something we don't.
Yep. Let me tell you a little further, and that's what I'm talking about. There's a physical and a non-physical component to it.
Mm-hmm.
For a lack of a better term, I'll call it interdimensional. We don't understand the technology or the science behind it. I don't think anybody does, including the government. These things are energy connected. There's patterns that I found over the years. But let me give you the story of the case that convinced me that we're dealing with something that is not a flesh and blood animal. Would you like me to tell you that story?
Sure.
Okay. So this is February 6, 1974, way deep up in the mountains here in southwest Pennsylvania. Some of your listeners, and you will probably remember the time period. There was a big national trucker strike. There was gas rationing going on. Remember those days?
Oh yeah, boy.
All right. There was a lot of violence across. There was a lot of violence across the country at that time. In Pennsylvania, the National Guard and the state police were patrolling together at the time. You had members of both teams that responded to this incident when it happened. I couldn't get up to the site the next morning. I couldn't get gas locally. So here's this woman who lives deep in the mountains in a little cabin home. She lived in the country, in the mountains all her life. She knew animals well. She was sitting there watching TV. It was a normal night. Suddenly, on her little front porch, she hears a little commotion. She has some empty soda cans, pop cans out there. Somebody's knocking the pop cans around. So she figured, well, a few weeks before there was a pack of wild dogs that came through. So she thought, I bet those dogs are back. So she thought, you know what? I'll grab my 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun, and I'll just shoot over their head. I'll load one chamber. I'll shoot over their head and scare those dogs away. She proceeds to do that. She loads one chamber of her shotgun. She walks up towards the front door, towards the porch. She turns the switch on for the outside porch light. She opens the door and steps out. There's no dogs there, but 6 feet in front of her is a 7-foot-tall, huge hair-covered creature that put its arms up over its head as soon as she turned the light on. What does she do? She pulls the trigger. She said there's this bright flash of light, like a flash on a camera, and it vanished right in front of her. But that's not the end of the story.
Uh-oh.
So
Okay.
her in-laws lived about 100 feet away. They heard the gunshot, and they called and said, what are you shooting at? She tried to tell him. The son-in-law grabs a sidearm, starts walking down that dirt road, and at some point, reportedly, he encountered 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, started shooting at him, ran into the cabin, and about that time, there was this large luminous object hovering over the trees at the same time. That's when they called the state police for help. So anyhow, I talked to the investigating officer, and he said, by the time they got up there and found the place, everything was over. But he said, something very strange happened up there. He said, the witnesses were terrified. They were very credible. They gave great details. But he said, what I base that on is the animal reactions. Now, I'm not sure if I told you fellas this or not, but I've been doing this now for over 64 years. I have never personally seen a UFO or a Bigfoot. I've interviewed thousands of people who've seen UFOs and hundreds of Bigfoot witnesses. But anyhow, very commonly, even in recent months, animal reactions to these close encounter reports are very common. That trooper told me when they got on scene, these people had a lot of animals, including several big dogs. When they got there, dogs wouldn't make a sound, wouldn't move, wouldn't bark. Remember him telling me one of the big dogs in the cage, he tried to force that dog out. The dog wouldn't even move. He should have ripped his arm off. Anyhow, the next morning when I got up there, everything was back to normal. That was the case, among others, that convinced me we're dealing with something which we do not understand. These kind of reports now occurring all over the country and around the world, similar type of reports.
So,
I wrote about this back in the 70s, and now you're starting to hear about it in many, many areas.
so that's the incident that convinced you that there was something there. In other words.
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
I mean, these people were very, very credible. I was up there with my team the next morning. The dogs are all barking like crazy when we got there early in the morning hours. And and we've heard others. And I told you about the cases where you have the tracks that just abruptly stop. There's no way that could have been fabricated. I had forensic people in my group. I had police officers. We knew how to investigate, and we knew how things could be fabricated. That was not the case.
Okay.
You know, this is absolutely fascinating. I mean, I'm afraid I could get lost in this conversation, and I know we only have so much, and we can talk a while, but we only have so much airtime.
We're good.
There was you mentioned something in the introduction, David. What did you call them?
Cryptids?
You're talking about cryptids.
Cryptids.
Yeah, that's
Explain that to me.
I got
I
that
don't know
word
what
from
that
Stan.
is.
I got that word from Stan's website. So Stan, tell us what a cryptid is.
Bigfoot is considered a cryptid. A cryptid is an animal, a creature that science has never confirmed exists, but people report seeing them. So Bigfoot is considered a cryptid.
Okay.
But we receive other types of strange creature reports, including many in recent weeks and months from the public, and these are consistent as well. The whole point is this, and that's what that's what I read about in my 4 different books. I talk about these reports all the time. You get reports again from all kind of credible people, including scientific people who have seen things they can't believe they saw, but they knew they saw it. We're dealing with something that we don't understand, but under certain conditions, these things come in and out of our reality. They leave physical evidence of time, and they're gone. You got patterns to it. You got similarities of reports coming in, and that's what's going on. So a lot of these creature reports, these things, they're not always just like with the Bigfoot reports. They're not always physically solid. Many reports have in daylight, they look physically solid, and sometimes they're more misty or foggy looking. Sometimes parts of the body are more solid than others or out of focus. These are things you don't generally hear, but this is what's going on. I deal with these things directly all the time, and many other researchers around the country are aware of these reports now, and many witnesses are talking about it. But it's not just the creature reports. Many of the UFO reports, and if you go to my website and you look at some of the reports in recent months of these objects in daylight, solid objects, physically changing form. And this is some of the things that even if you've been watching what the government's involved in now, investigating these reports and the military Navy sighting reports, these things have capability. I've talked about this for years and years. They can suddenly appear out of nowhere. They can look physically solid, but they can begin to almost instantly disappear or fade away, and they can change physical form. And it is very similar to the reports we're getting with some of these creature reports. It's the same type of phenomena. The pattern I found years ago is this: many close-range, low-level UFO sightings. So we're not talking lights in the sky. We're talking large, what look like solid objects. So they're seen very often near high-tension power lines and power plants and gas wells and bodies of water, railroad tracks, radio towers, but also many Bigfoot sightings and cryptids also occur in those same areas as well.
Hey, Stan, I have one question that's burning a hole in my pocket here. Do you believe that the government, our government, or any government, has the capability of keeping this such secret, keeping this such a secret over all these years that we really haven't been able to expose this? Do you think the government's capable of that?
Most definitely.
Oh.
And I mean, if you talk to anybody that's worked on different secret projects and government projects, and I've talked to many of them over the years, a lot of them they're very compartmentalized. You may have multiple people working on the same project, but they're only involved in one certain aspect of it. They may not have knowledge of what the other people are working on or what exactly they're working on. And over the years, you've heard bits and pieces. There have been deathbed statements coming out over the years from various former high-ranking people who told certain things that happened, but do they have the capability? Yeah, I believe they definitely do. But I'm also convinced that the government does know more than they're telling us, but they do not have the answers either. I said years ago, there's more than one origin to the unknown category of the UFO mystery, or UAP as the government now calls them now, unidentified anomalous phenomena rather than UFO. And I think that we're dealing with something that has a physical and a non-physical component to it. It's well beyond our present scientific understanding. It's going on all over the world. It's nothing new. It's been going for years and years. Most countries reported the same kind of thing going on, and nobody is in control of it, and nobody understands it.
Let me give you another theory here. See, just to get your comments on the theory. I just stumbled across a fella, and his name's Steve. He didn't want me to use his last name. He says, now not all, but he says, but a lot of the UFO sightings can be explained. He said, and he feels these are reflections of holographic radar off of the surfaces of aircraft. He said, we've had holographic radar long before the government was ready to admit it, before it was made public. And that's just his theory. I'm not an electronics wizard. I have no idea what that means, but he said that's reflections of holographic radar. Is that a theory that you've heard before, or?
Yes, I've heard that, and there are many theories. And let me tell you, from the time I got involved in this until the present time, I'm in contact with, I don't have my research teams anymore, but I'm in contact with many people in the scientific community and many very well-respected researchers. Some do it kind of quietly behind the scenes, but we always try to find explanations. And many of the reports coming in are misidentification of natural man-made objects. So in recent weeks and months, and many in the last couple of years, we're getting multitudes of reports of the Starlink satellites going over. We get a lot of misidentifications, everything from drones to balloons, lights on aircraft, Venus and Jupiter, reentry of space debris, meteors. We know those kind of reports, and we eliminate all those, and that's the whole point. You eliminate all the things that you can explain, and then you got this body of data that is definitely something else. And one, there's physical trace cases of these objects. Even in recent months, we've had physiological effects where people were pretty close to these objects in the sky, but they weren't that high in the sky. They were very low to the ground. And what's really intriguing, this is something a lot of people don't know about. If you go to my website, again, you can read about some of these cases in the last couple of years, which are just amazing. And these, again, are being reported all over the country. You're starting to hear a little more about it. Now, I knew about this back in the 60s. I wrote about it for years and years, and now it's really peaking up. But that's these small spherical objects. We can call them orbs because an orb is a spherical object, low to the ground. Many of these are daylight cases. In the last couple of years, you have incidents where these small spheres of light, but in some cases they're not light. They appear to be solid and metallic. They range anywhere from a few inches to about a foot or two in diameter, and even in daylight, they've been coming up within feet of people in daylight. And I can tell you two interesting cases last year in October, about 40 miles apart. One of my research associates up in Fayette County, Jim Brown, investigated the one. He's a very scientific guy. Anyhow, this man around 6 o'clock in the morning was in his pajamas. It was pretty cool outside, and slippers he had on, and he wanted to go out to get the newspaper been delivered. So he starts walking out to to get the newspaper. His wife found him sound asleep on the porch in his pajamas in the cold, which he would never do. He told her when she was able to finally awaken him, she had trouble getting him up. He said as he was walking out to the paper, this small white ball of light at eye level, with face level, was hovering between him and the paper box. When he was near it, within a few feet, he got so tired that he couldn't stay awake and he fell asleep. 3 days later, about 40 miles away up in the Laurel Highlands, where we get many reports, this woman's in her home, 2:30 in the morning, gets up to go to the restroom. She has one of these old historical homes. She comes out of the restroom. 5 feet away in her living room is this 1.5-foot diameter blue sphere with a mass moving around inside of it, hovering in her living room. She took a step towards it. She felt like an electrical charge, and she said, I got so tired I couldn't stay awake, and she felt sickly the next day. And she said, I'm an insomniac. I don't fall asleep. She said, for me to react like that was extremely unusual. That's just an example of what I'm dealing with.
Hey, Dave, I suppose we should admit we're both ex-Pennsylvanians and the territories you're talking
Oh
about.
yeah, we're quite familiar with.
Yeah, I was actually
Kecksburg thing, yeah.
born in Mount Pleasant, and I spent a couple of weeks at the Greensburg Hospital when I was young. So we're familiar with the. We're
Also
quite
born in
familiar
Mount
with
Pleasant.
the territory.
Yeah. So we're
And there's
we.
been a lot of activity in recent months in the Mount Pleasant area, by the way.
Hey, well, but let me just say this. Again, I'm gonna be a skeptic here in a sense. Now, they've been estimated like a couple trillion galaxies. So there's got to be intelligent life out there. No, in my mind, there's no doubt about it. Just statistically, this can't be the only place in the whole universe where intelligent life evolved. Assuming we're intelligent, I guess. But I guess the big question I always ask myself is how did the aliens find us? How did they get here?
And again, there's a lot we just don't know. We can speculate forever.
Yeah.
Once again, as I'm suggesting to you, when I was a kid, and everybody was talking about flying saucers and UFOs, well, all these reports, they all assumed were extraterrestrial visitors. We all thought that. The more I've learned from investigating these cases firsthand is maybe a very small percentage might be extraterrestrial. And how do we understand the technology? No, we don't. But I'm telling you, there's more and more data coming in. We're dealing with something else that we don't understand, that comes from another reality, another dimension, which we don't understand, that under certain conditions, these things come and go. They're here and they're gone. They leave evidence at times. There's different electromagnetic effects reported. There's a lot of data with these reports. And we're dealing with something else that might even be much more fascinating, and we might be dealing with something that's much closer to us that we can't sense, but animals do at times.
Okay, fair point. Yeah, fair point. Hey, Dale, you had a question I know that I found pretty intriguing. You want to ask him that one about meeting?
Well, I was just thinking, what question would you ask if you were able to communicate with say an extraterrestrial? Let's just say that, or even Bigfoot. I mean, for some reason, you personally in your travels and investigating all those things, you met one of these guys or one of these things face to face. What question would you ask him if you had a chance to?
That's a very, very good question, because there'd be so many different ones.
What, I mean, if you only had one.
Okay. Well, if I was done with an extraterrestrial, I would first probably ask about what is the technology used to get back and forth from where we originated from to Earth. And then, of course, I want to know where they came from. But in talking about Bigfoot, very few people claim to really have any communication. But here's something you probably never heard about, and I'll give you a great example because I witnessed this. There are some people, and it's very rare in Pennsylvania. It's more common out in the West Coast for some reason, that some people swear, some hunters swear, when they were near these creatures, that these creatures tried to mentally or telepathically communicate with them. And the people I talked to were so reluctant. Hunters and people who had this experience were so reluctant to even tell me about it because they couldn't understand it either. But there was a real interesting event that I was involved in back in the 1980s here in Westmoreland County along the Chestnut Ridge. And some of the landowners had called my team out because they were talking about this huge hairy creatures coming down from the top of the mountain down at the bottom section of the mountain, scaring the animals down there. So I was out there with a team, and you had several landowners there in a small group telling me about the Bigfoot they had been seeing very close by. One of them said very reluctantly that this thing seemed to be trying to communicate at times. While we were there, this person says, this creature is telling me right now that tomorrow morning there will be an odd UFO incident over the town of Homer City, Pennsylvania, in Indiana County, about 15 miles away. And lo and behold, early the next morning, multiple reports came in of this strange loud sound, like something was hovering very low over the town. They couldn't see it. It was so unusual, they called the fire department out.
Okay.
How do you explain that one?
I don't explain any of these, man.
No,
that's a good point. That's a good point.
When you're talking to those people and stuff like that, I wouldn't be sarcastic or, I would listen to what they had to say. And I mean, you were able to put all this together. In fact, I think it's fascinating that you spent this much time and you have this much knowledge about this stuff. Excuse me. And you have some books you have some books that people can read, and is there other ways to contact you? Just your website? Do you have a podcast?
We're going to put Stan's website is www.stangordon.info/WP. That's correct, Stan?
No, it's www.stangordon.info, stangordon.info.
Okay, okay. We'll put that in the show notes, and we'll put a link to your website in the show notes.
I was going to say, they can call me directly at 724-838-7768. They can also email me. The email is actually on my website, but there's sightings at stangordon.info, sightings at stangordon.info. My 4 books, The Silent Invasion, Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook, goes into great detail about all those strange UFO Bigfoot cases of the 70s. All my books have all kind of amazing UFO Bigfoot creature encounters. My newest book came out last year. It's called Creepy Cryptids and Strange UFO Encounters of Pennsylvania. And if you want to read about some of the weirdest creature reports and UFO cases are well documented, things I'll guarantee people never heard of before, you'll find in that book. And the books are available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com.
Hey, Stan, could you give us that phone number one more time to report?
It's area code 724-838-7768.
So anybody out there, you'll have Stan's website in the show notes. You've got the phone number. You've got his email, sightings at stangordon.info. And also, hey, let the Bucks know what you're seeing out there, what you're finding. So we're looking forward to some of you listeners telling us as well. So with that, I want to thank you, Stan. It's been, as you warned us, we could go on for hours with this. Really, there's so much stuff we could talk about here.
Well, listen, Stan, I also want to thank you. This is absolutely fascinating, and I wish you all the best in your research and your investigations and so on and so forth as you carry on out there. And like I said, we'll give plenty of contact information so how they can get in touch with you, and they can also write into us. They know how to contact us as well if they have any comments on today's episode. Stan, sometime in the future, if you have come up really interesting, don't hesitate to contact Dave and give us a shout. And who knows?
Again, absolutely. Yeah.
This is a long story. We could have a lot of fun with this.
Yeah.
So I take it we're running out of time, Dave.
We are right there. Yeah. I'm getting charged.
All I can say is it's
here.
been a blast. It's been fun. All the best to our listeners. Hope everybody's well. And this is Old Buck Dell saying thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.
Old Buck Dave saying the same thing. Thanks again, Stan. Thanks everybody for listening. Talk to you all next week.
Thanks for having me on the program.
Okay. Take care, Stan. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.
And before I forget, remember, next week we interview Tim Smith, author of Behind the Hedgerows. It's his first novel. Look forward to talking to Tim about it. Behind the Hedgerows is a fictional drama about human nature and the conflicts that go with it. It takes place in 1987 in the Hamptons. That's all I'm going to tell you now. You got to come back next week, folks. Bye.